You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is kindly sponsored by XStep, whose support makes everything you're about to listen to possible. Now, recently, those in the cave diving community watched the sad work of Ed Sorenson and Mike Young as they successfully recovered the bodies of two open water divers that lost their lives in the caves of the Dominican Republic. It's all the more sad when I think back to Speaking Sidemount episode 16, where Philip Lehman of the DRSS described the issues in the Dominican Republic with open water divers ignoring the cave warning signs and progressing into the cave without the training, equipment, and experience required to safely dive in that environment. In this particular case, the deceased divers had over 4,000 dives between them in the open water. One was a PADI Master Scuba Diver Trainer, which the PADI website describes as signifying that you've got the experience and certifications to offer all the training a diver needs to become a master scuba diver, the ultimate recreational diver rating. Well, super experience you might say, but not even close to what is required of a cave diver. In fact, as I pondered the opening to this episode, I spoke directly to Philip Lehman for more background, and it was Philip's opinion that you are better to be a less experienced diver with cave training than a super experienced open water diver in the cave environment. The less experienced diver is much more likely to respect their level and not to go where they should not be. Now, in this particular case, the deceased divers had considerable open water experience, and this was a direct contributor to the overconfidence that led them to believe that they could safely dive in caves. This was not their first cave dive, but it was their last. Their lack of training, equipment, and experience led directly to their demise. Bottom line, if you go past the cave warning sign without, and I'll say the words again, the correct training, equipment, and experience, then you're not only risking your life, but that of those who will selflessly come to try and rescue you or undertake the gruesome task of recovering your body and returning you to your loved ones. It's so easy to get quality cave training and equipment these days. Caves are awesome, but as the sign says, there is nothing in there worth dying for. Things can go wrong very quickly in an overhead environment, and when they do, you better have the tools, experience, and comfort level to be able to deal with it. Now, Ed Sorenson is a literal cave diving legend. In addition to his exploration of the caves of the Florida Panhandle, he is one of the original members of the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery Team. He's been involved in several successful cave rescues and, sadly, a number of cave recoveries. In particular, Ed is renowned as having the temperament and skill set to be able to undertake cave recoveries that are at the very limits of what is possible. In today's episode, we'll learn more about Ed's background in diving, what it takes to make a successful cave rescue, the skill sets that he employs to undertake recoveries that are beyond the scope or ability of other cave rescue teams, and then we go into some detail regarding the recent recovery of the two divers who perished in the caves of the Dominican Republic. Now, word of warning, Ed goes into great detail as he describes the recovery. If you have been affected by this loss or the loss of a friend or loved one in similar circumstances, you may wish to skip this section of the podcast. I'll note the timestamps in the podcast notes. Now, Ed and I also talk about the innovative KISS Sidewinder Rebreather, about Ed's approach to CCR, cave and DPV training, and lastly, we discuss the importance of fitness for divers. All this and much, much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Ed, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I start all of my episodes with talking a little bit about the background of our guests in diving, and I'm sure everybody knows of you, but I think it's really cool to share that. So could you mind telling us a little about your background in diving?
Yeah, I started in the 90s and then immediately fell in love with caves. Later on, got cave certified, came to Florida about 4 times a year for cave diving trips, and I'd stay a couple weeks at a time. And then 16 and a half years ago, I moved here to Florida.
Right. And from your bio, it seems that you progressed really quickly from being a start-out diver to a member of the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery Team. Can you share a little about those early days in cave diving and joining the team?
Sure. Diving just came natural for me. I enjoyed it a lot. I was always trying to learn more, push harder, farther, faster, but I always wanted to do it safely. So, like I said, it just naturally came to me.
Yeah. And joining the team?
When Henry Nicholson started the IUCRR in 1999, it was a by-invite only. A friend of mine was chosen for the regional coordinator for Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. He was supposed to handpick his team, and he picked me, and it was just the two of us. I did my first recovery in 1999 or 2000, I think, when I was on vacation in Florida, in the water, ready to start my dive, when a guy came up and yelled, "Help, help, help," my wife. So I got right to that too.
Yeah, obviously it's become quite topical since Thailand. And look, mistakes in cave diving usually result in recoveries, but you've been involved in a bunch of successful rescues. Can you share a little about those?
Yeah, I guess it's the location more than anything. One of the things Henry Nicholson said when he first was doing the training was there are no cave rescues. By the time we're called, it's almost always a fatality. So being right here by the water, just minutes away, all my stuff is always ready. My tanks are always full. My guys know that if we get a call, they can load my truck and have me ready to leave the driveway in 5 to 7 minutes. So it's really worked out well for several fortunate people.
Yeah, so time seems to be the major factor there, and having someone capable on site makes a massive difference to an outcome, I guess.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize what it takes when you're looking for a person. All the rescues I did were in complete zero visibility because they had started up, got lost off the line, what have you. So, there again, this all just came natural to me. When I get in the water, I'm very quick to think on the fly. So I can't see. All I'm doing is feeling around. Well, you only have about a 6-foot arm's length. So I would stop breathing and listen for any kinds of sounds or noises. And with the 2 students that the instructor left in the water to die, that's how I found them. I just listened. I could hear them. So it's just one of those things that you really have to know how to think on the fly.
Yeah. All of us who are cave trained and cave divers, we've been through the experience of practicing that drill, right? Losing the line, lost diver drills and so on. But it must be a completely different exercise doing it for real.
Yeah. It was interesting listening to the 2 students that I had rescued when they were doing their incident report with the sheriff's department and listening to what they went through and how they had done lost line drills in class. And they said, yeah, it's nothing like that. That's one of the things I've been doing for many years is I tell my students, a lot of the things I'm going to teach are not in books because I don't teach for class. I teach for real life. So that's what makes some of my classes quite unique.
Interesting. So the other thing that you're known for is making recoveries beyond the scope of most rescue teams. And your recent successful recovery with Mike Young in the Dominican Republic is an example of that. What specific skills are you bringing or employing that make the difference in challenging recoveries?
Well, I've done several that were quite difficult. I got a call out in about 2012. The guy that used to be the NACD president, Jeff Bauer, he was the first IUCR diver called for the recovery because of his proximity to the cave system in Tallahassee. And he located the body right away, but the guy was in such a small hole and his body was wedged on the other side of it. And after dive, and he just couldn't get him out. And he just told the sheriff's department, it's impossible. And they said, well, we got to do something. What do we do? And he said, well, there's only one guy I know that's even crazy enough to attempt this. I'll call him. So I went over there and it took me 7 dives over 8 hours. And he was through a complete gear off restriction and then stuck on the other side. So I had to find another way in that was even smaller and get him out. So like one of the guys, John Jones on the IUCRR, he's one of the only 2 that teach the IUCRR classes, him and Lamar. He said, well, unfortunately, Ed, you have the reputation that when it's impossible, call Ed. So there again, it just boils down to, can you think on the fly? When they've been in there a while, it's an unpleasant sight, if you can see. But it's all about going in with a plan. Everybody has a plan if they know anything about the conditions or the circumstances or the tunnel. But when plan A doesn't work, do you have a plan B? Do you have a plan C? Can you make up a plan D? So for this particular one, they had located the body and they had some really great divers over there working on it. They had a lot of great support. The Dominican Navy was fantastic in everything they did, the park personnel. So everything was made as easy as possible for us. But when the people that were over there working on it sent me a small video of this guy trapped in there, the first thing that came to mind is, well, if an open water diver can get in there, it can't be that difficult. Well, once I got in there, I thought, there's no way he got in here. There was so many small restrictions that it's almost physically impossible for him to even be there. So it was, it must have been just panic and sheer terror that drove him or the two of them to get where they got. But I have a harness that I designed back in 2012 on another small, tight recovery. And there again, it was just a look at what we've got to work with. What are we going to need to do? And how are we going to get this done? So I made this harness, and it's got a loop back here behind the neck. And then it goes down around the armpit, back through the loop, down around this armpit, back through the loop. So it's pulling from the entire torso. Because when you get a body, especially in very warm water like that, that's been in it for a length of time, the body starts to decompose. So you don't want to start pulling off body parts. But so having this harness already designed and made up really helped. A lot of times plan B was sometimes they just can't come out forward because of swelling in the body, size of the restriction, shape, how jagged is it, these kind of things. So sometimes it's easier to pull the body out backward. So I have another harness that I made, and it has a loop that goes around the waist and then goes through the loop around and out that loop down. And then I have another loop down by the kneecaps. So it goes around a leg, back through the loop, around that leg. So now it's pulling on two separate places evenly, and it keeps the legs together.
Right.
So I already had those two harnesses made up and in my pocket. Mike and I had never done a recovery together. I usually do all my body recoveries by myself. But I knew during the length of time and the state of the bodies and the tight restrictions that it was going to take both hands. I was going to have to come out backwards. So I said, I need you to hang on to my leg with one hand, the line with the other. And then he had to line me up through the zigzag tight restrictions so I didn't get lost off the line, and it freed me up to just concentrate on the body, how we're getting them through the restrictions, and so on and so forth. Another thing with the state of the bodies at that length of time is parts sometimes come off. So I also had a bag that I put over the head, and it helps protect the head. I always try and bring people's bodies out in as good a shape as I can possibly bring them out. They're going to have to identify the body. I don't like to do any more damage to them coming out than I absolutely have to. So the bag helps protect the head, plus it's got drawstrings up tight. So if it happens to come off during the recovery, I can pick it up.
Man, it's certainly grim work, isn't it?
It really is. I had a couple guys on a very difficult recovery that I had to, the hole is so small, I had to have help pulling him through, and they had volunteered to help. And when the head came through the restriction, they both bolted on me. And so it's not for everyone. And some people really get, PTSD type symptoms afterwards. Yeah. To me, it's just a job. And my main and really my only concern is, how do I get this family some closure? How do I get them to get on the grieving process and get their loved one?
Yeah. And the comfort is just extraordinary that you're bringing to them. And I commend you for that. And you mentioned the word job, but you don't get paid for this at all, do you?
No, it's all volunteer. In fact, when they asked, there were several of the IUCRR divers that are known to do smaller stuff like this that were contacted early on, day 1, day 2. And if needed, would you be willing to go? Because you're going to have to buy, a last minute round trip ticket to another country. We have to buy our own tickets. We have to put ourselves up in hotels. We have to pay for all our food, transport, everything. We have to get all our gear there. Just to get the amount of gear I needed to do this, I took 4 bags and a carry-on. So my added on luggage bill was enormous.
And one thing I was really happy to see, and I contributed to personally, was the GoFundMe for you and Mike for that. But I heard afterwards that you donated that money. So it's an awesome thing you do, mate. And I know from the cave community and from the diving community, you deserve great thanks for what you and Mike did in the recovery there. I think it was awesome.
I appreciate that. A friend of mine, before I was leaving, he asked, who pays you? And I told him the same thing I just told you. I said, we don't get paid. He said, who buys the tickets? I said, I do. Who pays for all the transport? I do. And he started that. I did not know anything about it until I got back. And we gave the money to the IUCRR for future recoveries when people couldn't afford a ticket. But we don't want somebody that maybe is really well qualified for the job not to go just because they couldn't afford a ticket.
Yeah. And one thing worth mentioning right now too, I know you and Mike were pretty pissed off with a couple of comments, and I think it's important to note that would have been just one idiot, I'm sure. But, anyone who's trying to think that you or Mike get anything personal out of this, apart from the satisfaction of helping the family, they're way off base.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. One of the things when I was doing the posts about it, if you saw them, I kept it simple. We got victim 1 out so they can have closure. The second day, I think all I posted was we got the second victim out. Both families have closure, and hopefully they can start their healing. So we were accused of trying to advertise products. We never mentioned the harness, the lights, the rebreather. We never mentioned a thing. I never said I brought Mike Young with KISS Rebreather because I wanted advertisement. Like I said, I'd never taken anybody on a body recovery.
Mate, look, here's the thing. Even if you did, so what? So, I mean, if KISS Rebreathers made a post about the fact that Mike Young was part of this, I think that's entirely appropriate. I mean, again, you guys are doing this in your own time, under your own volition, and you're doing a task that virtually, no one else can do, and you're doing it for nothing. So you should bathe in the positive light of what comes of that. And if it brings you business, good. I'd be more than happy with that. So again, I know you guys were upset by it. I'm sure many other people have told you this, but you shouldn't take any notice of that because it's got nothing to do with the real world. And I think what you guys did was awesome.
Right. I appreciate that. When I got off the phone I think I was talking to either Philip Lehman or Patrick Woodman, who were the last 2 in there. And they said, you're going to need to bring somebody. I got off the phone and then I started thinking, I've never taken anybody with me. Who do I trust my life to in something that small, dangerous, nasty, tight restrictions? And it took me all of about a quarter of a second to think, I think I need to call Mike. So I called him up and I said, because there's a 4-month waiting list to get on the list for these rebreathers. And I said, I know you're busy, and that's all the farther I got. And he said, I'm ready. Let's go. I got my stuff back.
Yeah, and that's actually one of my common questions, so I may as well ask it now. I mean, you've known Mike for a long time and have a really close association with him. Tell us a bit about, your relationship with Mike.
Yeah, Mike and I were good friends. I was diving his KISS Gem prototype back in the 2008 or something, and I thought it was supposed to be a recreational rebreather, but I thought I could turn it into a side mount rebreather. It would help with this big exploration I was doing that had really tight restrictions. And then later on, the Sidekick. And then when he gave me the Sidewinder to work on, he didn't even tell me what it was. He just called me and said, there's a new toy coming. And I said, great, but what is it? And he wouldn't even tell me. He said, it'll be in the mail. So when it got there, I looked at it and I went, what is this? And
looks like a couple of thermos flasks, right?
So, I really had a lot of fun with that. When I first got it, I thought, well, it looks interesting. It looks unique. I'm not going to dive it for what I do, but, I was happy with my Sidekick. So, but the more I dove it and the more we did in developing it and got it really tight, really neatly slung, the work of breathing is phenomenal. And I just loved it more and more and more and more. And that's pretty much all I dived. So.
Yeah, and it's super interesting to me because I'm looking at side mount rebreathers right now. I'm a side mount diver through and through, and I don't really want to go to back mount. And I'd looked at the Sidewinder and thought that it was kind of a recreational unit. And maybe sometimes you base things on the size of the package. And I was talking to Mike Thomas, who I know is trained with you on the Sidewinder. And Mike said, no, this unit, man, I use it and it's fantastic. So I started doing some research, and the video and the comments from students and divers using the Sidewinder is really, really compelling. And for someone like me, you know, the things I don't want to give up from my open circuit experience is the balance, the trim, the stability that I have in that, and worker breathing is always an issue. So talk us through some more your thoughts on that with respect to the Sidewinder.
Well, that's one of the things that I liked most about it is obviously at first I was the only one diving it. And when it was ready to go to the market, I think it came out in February of 17. I did the first class in December of 2016 on what Mike called the beta production model. So it was, we think this is how we're going to put it out. Tell us if you want us to change anything. Because I came up with the back plates that fit most of the, that fit all the different harnesses. I came up with a coupling system that clips it on. I had come up with an idea. I pitched it to Mike. It was kind of complex and convoluted. And he built this cage to go around it to hook it on. And it's all made out of TIG welded stainless. And it's such a work of art. I need it hanging on the wall. But then one dive and I went, yeah, this is terrible. And then I went back to hose clamps and bolt snaps and, keep it simple. Anyway, so from cleaned parts to done and on the trailer or on the truck tailgate is about 16 minutes. So that's scrubbers packed, linearity checks done, everything ready to go. But the balance and trim, when I do tri dives for people, a lot of rebreathers have a big learning curve and buoyancy is difficult. This thing, I've got hundreds and hundreds of pictures of people. One girl, a girlfriend of my dive partner, she probably only had 40 or 50 dives out of cave class. And I put her in the thing and she looked like she'd been diving it for years in the first minute. So it trims out so nicely if it's put together properly. I have seen a lot of people lately that I'm not real certain about how they were taught to set them up, but they're super tight. Anything my chest will fit through, I can go through. One friend of mine early on, I don't think it was out to the public yet. He does a lot of exploration with me. He was diving a homemade rebreather and then a Revo, and he was looking for something side mount, but he wasn't sure what he wanted. And there's an exploration here in the mill pond, and there's a restriction that only two of us have been through. And it's about 8 or 9 inches tall. My head barely fits through. I got to turn my head sideways most of the time. And I'm gearing up one day, and he had just done some survey back there, and he goes back there open circuit. And he said, where are you going? And I told him, and he said, well, you can't fit through that restriction in that. I said, everybody says that, and I'm tired of hearing it. And I said, so I'm just going to take a camera. I'm going to hold it out here, and we'll see. And one of my students, or former students, was sitting at the picnic table working on his laptop, and he looked at me and he goes, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You're going to go 9,000 feet back through a restriction that everybody on the planet says you can't make it through by yourself. And I said, yes. And he goes, what if you're wrong? I said, well, then I'll have a bad day. He goes, you're going to die? I said, no, I'm not going to die. I said, I've got plenty open circuit bailout with me. I said, it'll just be a long open circuit swim out. So I did. And I ended up taking that selfie footage, and a buddy of mine here at work, he put it together in a little video that's on the Cave Adventure Facebook page called 8 Inches of Fun. Anyway, when I got back, Jason Richards looked at that raw footage and he goes, I'll take 2. And so he bought him and his wife one right there on the spot. So
that's phenomenal. And look, I'm an ex-deep diver as well, and they're very kindly a sponsor of my podcast, but you've made some really cool mods to the Stealth 2.0 tech system from what I can see. Can you tell us about those?
Sure. I like the Stealth a lot. The problem is with the Sidewinder, probably its only major drawback is you can't reach behind you because those cans sit right up there on top of your tanks.
Right.
So you clip reels on your back D-ring to your crotch strap like a lot of people do. It's really difficult to reach. So the rear dump on the X Deep was nearly impossible to reach. So originally I put a tube all the way up through, and it came out the top and then down the shoulder, and it dumped like all, I've been doing that to harnesses since before there was side mount harnesses when we were building our own. So it was right where I expected to be. And the problem was, once I got it done, it was such a long tube down to get there and so many bends that you couldn't hardly pull it hard enough. In fact, Brian had said he had tried that on his Stealth Tech, and he said, you just can't pull it hard enough. Well, we came up with a little line stop ball, and that acts as a lever on the end, and now I can just reach up here with my pinky. So that worked out really well. Then when I was talking to Peter from X Deep at one of the DEMA shows, Brian was there with me, and we were talking about being able to remotely dump. So I had asked him if he could put a dump up here on the inside, and I showed him where I thought a good location was. The next year at DEMA, he had one where it came out the side instead, and it wasn't what I wanted up here, but he said he tried it. He's supposed to be sending that one to me. Hopefully we'll see that soon. But the one out the side really worked out pretty well. I've done a lot of work on that. I've done probably 7 or 8 of them so far. It's getting all the little things that make it work. So how do you keep that thing from moving? How do you keep it from getting hung up? So I've got a guy that works for me, taught him to modify stuff years ago when he first came to work for me. He's got just a natural engineering type brain. And so whenever we look at a problem together, he comes up with 8 solutions, a minute. So anyway, we've come up with this, and it really, if you've got anything more than just a small amount of gas in it, it dumps quite nicely. If you get down to the very last little bit of gas, you do have to have a slight left side down tip to get that last little bit of gas, but it really works very nicely.
Yeah, and that makes sense based on the location of that dump anyhow. You're going to have, I guess, the same thing. If there was a top dump, you'd have to be a little bit head up, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, Brian, he couldn't reach his even without a Sidewinder on.
Yeah. He talked about his short arms when he was on the show with me.
Yeah, I dive with him quite frequently. And he would crank to about a 70-degree list to get that gas out of there. So anyway, I think he's going to really like the side dump. It really works nice.
Oh, very cool. Well, good to know that we can modify the system that we're using already for the Sidewinder. Now, when I spoke to Mike Thomas, and also when I read the specs on the Sidewinder, it mentions in there, because it's in 2 canisters, that it's not as well suited to cold water. But I know for a fact that Mike's diving in pretty cold water. So where is the limit with the Sidewinder around water temperature and so on? Or is there actually a limit?
Well, you know how Sorb works. So the colder the water, the less efficient. It's basically, how do you keep those cans warm? So when I did Mike's class for him, we did it in France in around 48, 49 degree water. So we were doing 3+ hour dives, and I had no problems. Ever since I got the Sidewinder project, every time I hear that there's a problem, then I'll push that to see how far I can take it. Early on, it was, you get any water in it, you're going to die. So I flooded that thing numerous times, putting more and more and more water into it, and it just never became a problem. We eventually made a dumpable counterlung. Once anybody dives it for very long, they realize they don't need it. But with the cold, a friend of mine was diving my unit up in Canada in 39 degree water, and I said, well, what's the longest dive you did, Mike? And he goes, it's 39 degrees, Ed.
Yeah, exactly. How long can I stay here?
So, it's still good for several hours, even in 39 degree water. And I'm not good for several hours in 39 degree water.
No.
They make the syntactic foam, which keeps the heat in. And if you're going to dive really, really cold, they have the heated canisters now. So there's virtually no cold issues whatsoever.
Okay, well, let's push the other limit. So the Sidewinder is rated to 91 meters, 300 feet. How does it perform for trimix dives?
Excellent. I don't do deep much anymore. I've only had it to about 310, but the work of breathing is phenomenal. It performs phenomenally. It's just a great unit. The reason that it has a depth rating at all is because it's got the blocked orifice, not because anything's going to implode. So I'm running mine with the adjustable needle valve, and so it pretty much has no depth limit. You know, I'm getting old, so I don't have the burning desire to go 4, 5, 6 feet anymore. I get bored on that much Nico, but if I needed to go there, I would have no worries, no concerns at all taking the thing to 300 or 400, 500 feet.
That's super interesting. And that needle valve you spoke about was the new one that came out for the Sidekick as well, right?
Yes. Well, it's not out yet. It's still in an experimental phase. Mike usually makes them, gives them to me, Brian, a couple others. They will be available soon to the public, but I think it's going to be you have to be recommended by somebody like Brian or myself to get one. So Mike's just concerned that the whole it's feeding you your metabolic rate now is gone, and are you going to be smart enough to watch your PO2? So
I hear you. What's interesting to me now is the contrast between the Sidekick and the Sidewinder. So where does one come into play versus the other, or is it more what do you feel more comfortable with?
Well, it's an excellent question. I love my Liberty. I love my Sidekick. I enjoyed all of them, really. But when you have a unit on your side, if you're going to do something with small restrictions, which I do on a near daily basis, where just the width of my chest is all I can get through there, the one advantage to the side mountable unit, Sidekick, Liberty, Flex, SF2, is you can take it off, put it in front of you to do a really, really small restriction. But the downfall is you only have one bottle. So since all I do is cave dive, redundancy is key. So you've got to carry stage bottles and you've got to drop them or more stuff to feed through the holes. When I'm doing my Sidewinder, most of the time I'm diving it, unless I'm doing deep trimix dives, I'm diving it with little LP50s. They're super small. My profile is nothing. I have redundancy and I can carry stages. So your trim and balance that you spoke about is quite different with the side mounted rigs, and some of them more so than others. Also, your work of breathing when you get out of horizontal trim is worse on some more than others. But the balance and the comfort, the familiarity that you already have with side mount is all there. All you've done is added 25 pounds of rebreather.
Right. So you teach all of the Sidewinder courses, Sidekick courses, and others as well. What would someone expect from coming on a Sidewinder course with you?
Well, it depends on if they're doing a crossover or if they're doing a full class. So all of my classes, I teach the why behind the how. So I'm never going to teach you how to do something without thoroughly explaining why. Because in my opinion, knowing the why is more important than the how.
Sure.
So the main thing is, I don't want to just teach you how to dive a rebreather. I want to teach you how that thing is working, how everything functions, and I want you to become in tune with the machine so it becomes part of you. So, because we all know everything man-made, it's not a matter of if something is going to break, it's when it breaks and where are you going to be when that happens.
Sure.
So if you're extremely comfortable with how everything's working, why it does that, and all the scenarios I teach, think of this as a flow chart.
Yep.
Ed is supposed to feel like this. Does he? If yes, continue on. If no, move to the no box. So we attack every single aspect exactly that way, so that when something happens for real, it's just kind of well, that sucks. Here's what I'm going to do. There should never be that moment of sheer panic. It's just, well, that sucks. Here's what we're going to do. So that's what they should expect.
It sounds like a very similar thought process to your problem solving that you apply to rescues or recoveries.
Right. I don't want to make a memorizing diver. I want to make a thinking diver. Yeah. So I don't want you to go over charts and X times 3, what was that formula again? I want you to be able to think on the fly. Everything should be done just that quick and on the fly.
Yeah. And I guess there's an obvious answer to my next question, but I'm interested in the progression from starting out on one of these units through to taking it into an overhead environment and taking it to depth. How do you approach that?
Well, it's like anything else. For one, you need to get proper training, know the why behind the how, get familiar with that machine, and then it's just a simple matter of you need to put hours on it. How many hours a week, how many hours a month can you do if it's going to sit there for a while? So you need to get your hours on it. And then for those 99% of the ones that I've taught on this rebreather, on any of the rebreathers, they're all cave divers. Mm-hmm. So then when you're really comfortable, then we're going to go and do a cave CCR crossover. And pretty much all I need to see is, can you do every skill we just did in cave class, but now in a rebreather?
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. And the building hours is really important, isn't it?
Yeah. And, just like everything else, clear back from the 5 rules of cave diving, don't go above your training. So if you just got certified on the unit yesterday, we're not going to go on a 5,000 foot cave dive today. Mm-hmm. So think about where can I go that's going to be simple, easy, and I can just have fun and get used to this machine.
Yeah. Earlier, we were talking about the problems that result from you making a mistake in an overhead environment. And one of the things that I know you lecture on is on diving safety. And I'm interested in your thoughts around safe diving practice, be it open water, overhead, or whatever. How do you approach your lectures on that?
Well, almost all of mine are based around cave diving because that's pretty much all I do anymore. But the same thing is going to apply to open water. You've just got a better ascent, providing you don't have an artificial overhead, i.e. decompression. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing. How far have you been in the cave? Okay, so we're not going to, if you've been 1,500 feet in this cave, we're not going to go hook up with a new buddy and go to 5,000 feet. Get familiar with it. Get comfortable with it, because as well as I do, cave diving is about 90% mental. So the more we can keep stress down, just like I teach in cave class, there's lots of precursors to stress. But in my humble opinion, the 3 most important are time stress, gas stress, and distance stress. And everybody's going to have those. It's just going to be to a differing degree. So, if somebody's got 1,000 cave dives and boy, they've been 2,000 feet in this place and 3,000 feet in that place, that's great. They're comfortable there. But if somebody all of a sudden takes them, hey, we're going to go 19,000 feet today, they're going to get time stress, gas stress. I don't care how experienced they are. So just always look at you and your experience level, what you've done, how comfortable where you are when you were at your limits, and then always listen to the little man on your shoulder. If he's telling you, Steve, you should leave, and you don't, that's on you.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. When I spoke to Steve Bogarts a few months back, he almost used the same words. It's about progressively building comfort level. He talked about the little devil and the little angel. The little angel's giving him good advice. The little devil's trying to get him to do the wrong thing, right? So, and there's always that temptation. There's always that golden bar or that next corner that you could go around when you know you shouldn't, right?
Right.
Now, you've also been involved in a lot of dive propulsion vehicle training, and you wrote the manual for PSAI on DPVs. Tell us a bit about your approach to diving DPVs in overhead environments.
Okay, so the main thing is for my classes, my approach is I always take them to open water first, because I'm going to teach them how to do the 3 types of swim with it first. Just because one's going to simulate, we're in smoky viz, or zero viz, limited viz, but I think I'm going to get through it fairly quickly. So we're going to learn how to swim with the scooter. Also, when you're pulling a reel from a cave, you're going to have to do something with that scooter. So I teach them how to clip it off behind them and tow it between their legs. Teach them how to clip it off to an upper D-ring if they choose to do that, like a stage bottle instead. So they do the 3 types of swims. Then we go into maneuvering. And I want to see really good maneuvering before we can move forward. Then we move on to the toes, and then air share toes. And I like to know that we've gotten all these things out of the way. I make them put in a reel and take out a reel in open water, like they were simulated putting money in the cave. And can they do it with buoyancy control and good horizontal trim and efficiently? And then we're ready to go to the cave. So It's all about how good is your buoyancy, horizontal trim, and propulsion, i.e. swimming when you're not on the trigger. And then how good is your ability to ride the scooter, and at any given moment, you should be able to shut it off and stay horizontal. So anyway, I want to know that they have good trim while on the trigger also, because a lot of times if they're slightly positive or slightly negatively buoyant, they're using the scooter to compensate for that. So if I see that scooter's tipped slightly nose high, then I know they're slightly negative and they're compensating with the scooter, which could also blow the cave out, and you could put other divers that are just in the cave at risk from a zero viz or a limited viz exit when it wasn't their fault. So basically it's just all about proper technique, proper safety, knowing how to calculate their gas reserves, which is very similar to calculating bailout for a rebreather. So that's about it.
Very cool. And you're based in the Florida Panhandle, and I've done some diving in Ginnie Springs in the Gainesville area, but I haven't been to the Panhandle. So tell us a bit about diving in your area.
Okay. Well, when I was still living in Oregon, I was going to Florida, and that's where I was diving. Most of my dives was Ginnie Springs, Cow, Peacock, all those, Telford, Little River, and enjoyed it tremendously. But one year, 2002, I was down for a 2-week vacation, and everything down there was blown out. And my good friend Steve Gamble, that does the TPV and scooter repairs back then, we were diving Manatee. He lives there in Gainesville. And I asked him, I said, well, what else is there to dive? I'm not diving Ginnie for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And he brought me up here. The cave, Jackson Blues was the first one we dove. Very, very white, beautiful cave. I really enjoyed the experience. So we went to lunch. Steve would only do 1 dive a day, so he went home. My buddy and I, that got me into the IUCR, we stayed and did another dive. We drove all the way back to Lauraville, stayed there, dove Ginnie the next day. We were having lunch, and I looked at Jeff, and I said, what do you want to do tomorrow? He said, I want to go back to that Jackson Blue place. Mm-hmm. So we came back up here. We dove Jackson Blue again. We were eating lunch, getting ready to try and find Twin Cave, and I called Steve, and I said, how do I get to Twin? He told me. We scootered out from the dirt boat ramp, had a fantastic time. And when we were back in town eating lunch, I was going through a little real estate magazine, and I found this place on the mill pond and bought it right there on the spot.
Rest is history. So, you run Cave Adventurers there. Tell us a little bit about what you guys do.
Okay. Well, originally my plan was just to move here and go cave diving every day. I wanted to retire. I owned a fairly decent excavation company, construction company. So I just wanted to retire and go cave diving. But there was no place to get any gas fills. So I needed a compressor. They were expensive. I needed a booster. They were expensive. I needed this. I needed that. Mm-hmm. And so I just started a business name basically for a tax write-off. Mm-hmm. And I started Cave Adventures, and then people just started coming. And it just grew and grew and grew and grew. So now we have 4 guys working for me. There's 2 girls in the office, Stacy, my other half, and she's got a girl that works for her. We've got 3 pontoon boats that divers can use to go out to dive the other caves in the mill pond. We have a complete shop. Yeah. We've got 2 compressors that run all the time, lots of storage bottles. We've got a master line electric booster for boosting argon, oxygen, and helium. A complete dive shop, warehouse, online store. So we pretty much do it all.
Sounds amazing. It's funny how things start out sometimes, isn't it? And what they become. You know, often you're in a case where you need something, and what you don't realize is other people need exactly the same thing.
Yeah. It grew out of necessity. I needed all this equipment to have fun, and the plan was to retire. But now I work 7 days a week. And,
yeah, I feel your pain. I live in the far north of New Zealand, and I was trying to do the same thing. And now I'm in a situation where I'm running 3 or 4 businesses. So isn't it funny, huh? So the one thing I noticed, I mean, you're a little bit older than me, but not much, and you look incredibly fit. And I'm also really fit. And dive fitness is a really important topic for me. I haven't covered it very much on the show, but my feeling as a fit diver is certainly a safer diver. What's your attitude to that?
Well, I've always been into fitness. I've been a very active person. So I was playing hockey since I was 8 years old. I raced motocross. I skied in pro slalom ski tournaments. And I skied off cliffs and snow skiing.
Mm-hmm.
I mud bog race. It's just, I was always on the go. Everything. In fact, my mom used to joke to all her friends when they'd hear I had another new extreme hobby. If it doesn't have risk of serious injury or death, Ed's not interested.
Right.
So I've always been very active. I've always been into working out and staying fit. And then I got into bodybuilding in about 1976 or 7. And I wanted to become a professional bodybuilder. And as I grew and grew and grew, then I started going to contests and realized I couldn't do it without steroids. And I kind of got into it, health, and that kind of seemed defeating the purpose. So I chose not to go that path. But if we looked around here, that's my gym.
Oh, awesome. Just for the listeners, his office is actually really a gym. He's got a desk in there that's surrounded by fitness equipment. Man, that's awesome.
So when I was building the warehouse for our online store, I had some fitness equipment in my house, and I thought, I want my own gym, because I live in a very small town, and there was only 2 gyms, one on each side of town, and it was a long drive, and I just thought, I want my own gym. So I built my own gym. And we have customers come in all the time and they say, can I work out? Yeah, absolutely. It's open to anybody and everybody. So they'll come into the gym and they'll say, wow, this is nicer than the one I paid money for. So I've always wanted to stay fit. I've always wanted to, everything I do involves some kind of need for strength or stamina. That last body recovery in the DR. I'm almost 60 years old, but I am fairly strong and I work out every single day. And it was almost past what I could physically do. Those bodies were over 150 pounds positively buoyant. So it was everything and then some I could do. It took me 5 days just to recuperate when I got home. I had pulled muscles in my neck. I had strained tendons in my elbows. It was very physically demanding. I don't know if I wasn't in the shape I'm in that I could have completed that. But I try and do cardio because I've had several friends that we've had to put in bags and they've had heart attacks during cave dives. Yeah. So I think fitness is very, very important, especially for diving, especially for cave diving. We're a long ways back. If something goes wrong, you know, the chance of survival is limited. So I've always been a very big proponent of eating right, good amount of cardio, and even if you don't want to be huge, at least, you know, everything as we get older, as you know, is a use it or lose it. So if we don't use those muscles, they're going to atrophy down. So at least keep in shape. And I've been a big proponent of health and fitness for many, many, many years.
Yeah, no, I'm with you all the way on that one. My background, I used to actually manage a Gold's Gym, would you believe? I've never been a bodybuilder, but I've been surrounded by that for 25, 30 years now. And one thing for me, I'm just a little bit younger. I'm 56, and I work out not every day, but I work out every second day. And for me, I need the recovery from the workouts, you know, so that's how it works for me. And I tend to focus much more now. I find that I break myself if I try and lift heavy weights now, something goes wrong. I have a background in the military, so I do lots of military style training, lots of body weight. And so, yeah, I still have the strength, but I'm very fit. And it's an amazing feeling as an older man now to be able to be this fit and at the same time be able to apply that to the thing I love, which is diving. And, you know, it's no problem for me carrying cylinders around. I'm not a big guy either, but, you know, all of the things that I can still do, I can still jump up on things, jump over things, you know, it's a great feeling, isn't it?
Body weight exercises are fantastic. Pull-ups, push-ups, all those things are fantastic. One of my old workout partners, he got me into when we were trying to look for new shoulder exercises, doing a handstand push-up, flipping your legs up on the wall. And if you haven't done that, try it. It's way harder than I used to bench 400 pounds, squat 600 pounds. Those days are long gone. Now I do what I can do just to get the amount of reps that I want to do and to feel like the muscles are working. So I very seldom do heavy benches much over about 250 anymore as opposed to 400, where I used to curl 55, 60 pound dumbbells. The most I do now is 35, sometimes 40. So I don't have the burning desire to get huge anymore. Those days are 20 years gone. But I do want to feel like they've been worked. So I do one body part a day. And one of the things that I found worked really well is I have a very nice Star Trek 9600 treadmill. I got a pinched nerve in my neck from a bulge and herniated disc a few years ago. And the surgeon said I needed to get surgery right away and that my diving career was over. You're done. That didn't work well for me.
No.
So instead, I got a pain management doctor to give me a bunch of stretches and exercises, and we do that. But he said no more impact. So no more jogging, no more punching on the heavy bag. So now I get my treadmill up to about 12-degree incline, and I just do a fast walk. So I don't have the impact, but I get the heart rate up. And one of the things that I found that really works well is I'll do a 5-minute warm up and that escalating angle on the treadmill. And as my heart rate gets up, then I'll step off the treadmill for 30 to 45 seconds to do a set of whatever body part I'm working that day, and then back on treadmill. So your heart rate only drops, let's say you're trying to keep it at 150 or 155 beats a minute. It'll only drop 5 to 7 to maybe a maximum of 10 doing a set. You're back on the treadmill. So I'm getting my cardio and one body part in a day. So that way each body part has plenty of time to rest and recuperate. Plus I'm keeping that heart active. It's different than, 20 years ago when we were younger and we could could push lots of iron, but it keeps me in shape, and that's the main goal.
Yeah, awesome. And I think I'd like to do some more on fitness because I see a lot of fit divers, but I see a lot of very unfit divers as well. And I was initially trained by a Navy diver, and I know their attitude 100% was a fit diver is a safe diver. And so they focused on that heavily. And I think it is important for us, especially as professional divers, to be role models and to be in shape. So thanks for sharing on that. There was some really good info. I might even try some of that myself. Thanks a lot.
Not a problem.
Well, Ed, I hate this because we could go on for a lot longer, but I have to go to work, unfortunately. So I'm out of time, but I really appreciate you giving me your time. I think you've shared beyond my expectations in terms of the rescues and recoveries. That was, as I said, a bit gruesome and grim, but at the same time, it's the reality of what happens when things go wrong. And thank God there's someone like you around who is able to bring some closure to the family. So love that. Also, the information on the Sidewinder is super impressive, and I'm very interested both personally, and I hope that the listeners really got a lot out of that as well. So Ed, thanks very much, and I hope we catch up in person sometime.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you. Anytime you come here, I'll hook you up and take you touring all through the great caves we got here.
You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.